Old Grognard says, let's look at how overland travel works with mounts, pack animals, and vehicles in 2nd edition AD&D. Hello, and welcome to Old Grognard Says. Today we're going to continue looking at overland travel, specifically how mounts, pack and draft animals, and vehicles like wagons and dogsleds work in the game's overland travel system. How this is going to work is that we're going to look at the rules as written, and also we're going to have to fill in some blanks they've left us. We do have the power of the internet, so I think we're going to be okay. Before we continue, if you're into no-nonsense videos about how pre-internet tabletop games work, especially AD&D 2nd edition, please take a few seconds to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to make sure you're notified when I upload new videos like this one. Also, be sure to enable notifications so that the bell icon will do what it's supposed to do. I generally upload new videos once or twice a month, so please do all that YouTube stuff if you want to know about them when they come out. Now back to mounts and vehicles. Our journey begins on page 123 of the DMG, with the section titled Advantages of Mounted Movement. I'm going to start off by reading what it has to say. When determining overland movement rates, remember that most riders spend as much time walking their mounts as they do riding them. The real advantage of riding is in the extra gear the mount can carry and its usefulness in combat. Thus, while an unencumbered man can go about the same distance as a heavy warhorse across clear terrain, 24 miles as opposed to 30, the man must travel with virtually no gear to move at that rate. Were he to carry an assortment of arms, a suit of chainmail armor, and his personal items, he would find it impossible to keep up with a mounted man similarly encumbered. Let's dissect this a bit. There's this part where it says, riders walk their mounts as much as they ride them. I'll take their word for it on this one, but I have heard on more than one occasion that it's really hard on horses to ride them downhill, so when a trail goes down a steep hill, the best practice is to dismount and walk your horse down instead of riding. This next part, about 24 miles versus 30 across clear terrain, highlights one of the most confusing things about overland travel in this game, and that is that most material written conflicts with the DMG on how this works. The DMG is written with the idea that a character has movement points equal to their movement rate, but most other material is written with an overland movement being based on twice your movement rate. That won't really come into play here, but keep it in mind when you read examples the DMG uses. Anyways, let's move on to what the DMG says about different types of mounts and pack animals, starting with horses, ponies, and mules. Horses, ponies, and mules are all listed on page 194 of the Monstrous Manual. This is where you're going to find their movement rates and basic creature statistics like AC, hit dice, etc. This is also where you're going to find their carry weight limits. We're going to take the carry weight table and expand it to not only include horses and horsekin, but also the other animals we're going to talk about, so we'll rename it the Mounts and Pack Animals table. We'll also add a column on the end for Monstrous Manual page numbers to look up their creature stats. Anyways, let's look at how horses work. Horses require 10 pounds of forage and fodder each day, along with an unspecified amount of water. They also need to stop and rest while traveling and have their saddles and packs removed for this to be effective. In game terms, you could assume that this just happens on its own during the 10-hour travel day, and I wouldn't have this be a thing you have to declare or anything like that. It also says horses should be hobbled or tethered on a long rope at night so they can graze without wandering off. Horseshoes aren't required unless the horse spends a lot of time on rocky terrain and in that case, they should be reshod about once a month. Again, these are things I would assume to happen, and I wouldn't pay too much attention to them unless you have players that are really into those things. The next section in the DMG is about ponies, donkeys, and mules. These guys, except for donkeys who aren't listed, are also on page 194 of the Monstrous Manual and are mostly the same as horses, but they do have some advantages. They can survive by grazing, so you don't need fodder like horses do. They also reduce the movement point cost for rugged terrain by 1. So, for example, low mountains only cost 3 points per mile to traverse. The downside compared to horses is that ponies and mules only have a movement rate of 12 versus the higher movement rates of most horses, so keep that in mind. Camels are split into two categories, dromedary and Bactrian. In game terms, the difference is that dromedary camels reduce movement point costs for sandy deserts by 1, and Bactrian camels get a similar bonus in rocky deserts. The stats for camels are on page 243 of the Monstrous Manual under Mammal Herd. Camels don't have a listed carry weight, so in order to find an answer on that subject, I dug around online and found an article in the Military Review, originally published in August of 1975, titled The United States Army Camel Corps 1856 to 66 by John Shepard. My apologies to anyone with that last name if I pronounced it wrong. Anyways, in the article it states, ordinary dromedaries could easily carry a 550-pound load, slightly more than twice what a common pack mule was expected to carry. The larger dromedaries could comfortably pack 700 to 800 pounds and, on occasion, would carry as much as 1,000 pounds for short distances. The larger and stronger Bactrians could carry close to 3/4 of a ton with ease. Going off of this, I'm going to say a camel can carry twice as much as a mule, or 500 pounds as their standard carry weight. If we add them to the table from earlier, their carrying capacity would look like this. If you want to have some of the larger dromedaries or Bactrians like it talks about in the article, then you could up their carry weight to 3 mules, and their carry weight on the chart would look like this. The DMG says camels need to eat daily, but only need water every 4 days or so. They don't need separate fodder unless there isn't grazing available. Like horses, they should be hobbled or tethered at night to keep them from wandering off. The main points the book lists for dogs, assuming they're used to pull sleds, are that they need a pound of meat per dog per day. If dog sledding, characters should carry dried meat for this purpose. Dogs also generally take care of themselves, though it points out that certain dogs need to be kept separated to avoid fighting. Dogs are listed on page 57 of the Monstrous Manual, and whether you want to use the stats for War Dog or Wild Dog is up to you, depending on how big you want your sled dogs to be. Dogs generally aren't used to carry anything, so I'm not going to add them to the carry weight table. The first thing the DMG tells us about elephants is that they require a lot of fodder. Rather than giving a stat for how much they need, it says that they can move through heavily forested areas and graze as they go without it affecting their movement. In an area with less vegetation, like a savanna for example, they reduce their movement points to 1/4, or in other words, the less food there is, the slower they move. Elephants need to bathe or be bathed daily, and will give themselves dust baths if necessary. Another odd thing about elephants is that the DMG says they aren't very good at negotiating cliffs, and if they run down steep slopes, they have to make a saving throw versus breath weapon. If they fail, They fall and tumble the rest of the way down the slope. So, in other words, if you play Hannibal games, you win Hannibal prizes. On the plus side of things, elephants ignore movement penalties for mud. The carry weights of elephants aren't listed in the game material as far as I can tell, but digging around on the internet, it seems an elephant can carry 25% of its body weight without too much trouble. I'm going to engage in abstraction for convenience here and say that in game terms, elephants all weigh 5 tons. This makes 25% of their weight come out to 2,500 pounds, or the same weight as 10 mules can carry. If we add them to the carry weight chart, they would look like this. The stats for elephants are on page 107 of the Monstrous Manual. Yaks are the last animal type listed in the Mounts and Pack Animals section. The DMG doesn't say much about them except that they lower movement penalties by 1 when in mountains, similar to how mules work. They also are unaffected by cold. I looked online and the carrying capacity of a yak varies wildly depending on what region they're from, and there aren't any stats for them in the Monstrous Manual. So, once again, I'm going to do some abstraction for convenience. I suggest using the stats for mules and just having yaks be their cold, high altitude mountain equivalent. That covers animals in the PHB, but I really wanted to have at least one dinosaur available for use as a mount or pack animal. The question was which one? After looking for a bit, I saw the Ankylosaurus and imagined them being used by lizard men to haul cargo and passengers and howdahs. Then the idea of the lizard men filing and reshaping some of the creature's spikes to use as cargo tie downs came to mind, and I was sold on the idea. So now I'm going to walk through the process of making the Ankylosaurus into a pack animal. The first thing we need to do is find out some things about this creature and then use those things to figure out which existing animal is most similar. The Monstrous Manual has them listed as being between 4 and 5 tons. I also looked on the wiki and it has the largest and smallest specimens ever found estimated to be at 8.76 and 5.27 tons respectively. If we average the wiki weights together, we get almost exactly 7 tons. I like the idea of them being on the larger side of things, so we'll use the 7-ton figure and calculate their carry weight the same way we did the elephant. This gives us a carry weight of 3,500 pounds, or the same as 14 mules. The elephant is also a good basis for other characteristics. I think the thing where movement is determined by vegetation fits well with the idea of a plant-eating dinosaur, as do ignoring mud and avoiding mountains. I don't like how their movement rate is only a 6, so I think I'll up their movement rate to a 12. After all, this is an out-of-print fantasy game and we're adding extinct animals to it, so I don't think anyone will mind. I just think that a 6 movement is too slow for them to be useful. We'll also add a note somewhere that the Ankylosaurus can't be used to pull wagons or carts, since their tails thrash about when they're excited and tend to break things. This isn't unprecedented since there's a large domesticated lizard in Dark Sun called an inyx, and it has a similar thing going on with its tail. Everything else stat-wise is on page 54 of the Monstrous Manual. You can use this same process to add other creatures and dinosaurs, especially if you have access to Dark Sun, since a lot of the animals they use in the game are basically dinosaurs already. On page 124, there's a short section on vehicles. And again, I'm going to start out by reading the first paragraph because there isn't anything to be gained by trying to summarize it. While animals are useful for getting around in the wilderness, they are seriously limited by the size of the load they can carry. Peasants and merchants often use wagons and carts for trade in civilized areas. Chariots are favored by the wealthy and in times of war, but are not normally used for long-distance travel. Sledges and dog sleds are handy in the snow and ice-bound regions. Player characters may find all these vehicles necessary during the course of their adventures. Let's start out by looking at the wheeled vehicles, which are carts, wagons, and chariots. Carts are relatively small, have two wheels, and are pulled by one or two animals. They reduce the speed of the animals pulling them to one-half their normal movement. The weight the cart can carry is 3 times what the animal can normally carry, not counting the driver and the weight of the cart itself. Adding a second draft animal doesn't affect movement speed, but adds the second animal's pull weight to the cart. For example, if you had a cart with one mule hooked to it, it would carry 750 pounds of cargo. A second mule wouldn't increase your movement, but would increase your cargo capacity to 1,500 pounds. Wagons have 4 wheels, are bigger than carts, and have the advantage of being able to hitch 2 or more animals, with up to 12 being common. So if we had a wagon with 8 mules hooked to it, we would be able to carry 6,000 pounds in our wagon, provided the wagon was up to the task. Chariots are 2 wheeled vehicles built for speed. They have anywhere from 1 to 4 horses pulling them. How they work is a bit different than how wagons and carts work. A chariot pulled by one horse can carry its normal load at 2/3 its normal movement rate, not including the weight of the chariot. Each additional horse adds 1 to the chariot's movement or increases its carrying capacity by its normal load. The example the book gives with this is a chariot with medium war horses. One horse would be able to pull the chariot at a movement of 12 with 220 pounds on board. Each additional medium war horse would increase the movement by 1 or the carry capacity by 220 pounds. Adding extra horses can't make the movement rate of the chariot higher than what the horse would normally do without the chariot. Wheeled vehicles can only move on clear terrain, roads, or fairly good trails that are wide enough to accommodate them. A good functional interpretation of this is that they can travel on terrain that has a cost of 1 or less if they aren't on a road or trail. For other types of terrain, we need to look at sledges and dog sleds. So sledges in game terms function as carts, but are able to traverse ice and hard-packed or shallow snow and ignore movement penalties for either. They aren't able to function on other terrain types. Dog sleds are normally pulled by between 7 and 11 dogs. When a dog is hitched to a dog sled, its movement is reduced to one-half of normal, and the dog can pull 80 pounds, not including the weight of the dog sled. Each additional dog increases the carry weight by 80 pounds and restores 1 point of movement. Like the chariot, adding additional dogs can't make the dog sled faster than a dog would be normally without the dog sled. Okay, that pretty much covers how mounts, pack animals, and vehicles work in 2nd edition AD&D's Overland movement system. Thanks for watching. Nikola Tesla's giant pigeon and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day.